Hello and welcome to the Limo PROFTTS Show. I'm your host, Ed Stapleton Jr. Today's guest is limousine industry legend and founder of the CLS brand and current owner of CLS Las Vegas, Charlie Horky. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ed. It's a pleasure to be invited on your show.
Excellent. So let's get right into it. Why don't you take me back almost 40 years ago when you were 19 years old, well, actually 33 years ago when you were 19, and you started CLS. Take me back there, how it all began.
Actually, I was 20, but how it all began was I was working at a place called Budget Rent-A-Car in Los Angeles called Third and La Cienega. They specialized in, they were the first ones that pioneered renting high-end luxury cars. Before, you'd rent a Buick or a Mustang, maybe. They rented Mercedes-Benzes. And I met a man at the time who was older, 24 years old, and he said, do you think you could be in business? Would you like to do something together? And I couldn't think of anything, and then I thought, well, how about a limousine company? And the reason why I thought of that was I had worked at a rent-a-car company the summer before, and I washed the limousines for a company back in the late 70s called Starship Limousine. And since I drove the cars to the wash and washed them and brought them back and sat around with the chauffeurs, I thought I had a pretty good grasp of how a limousine company would work.
Gotcha. So tell me how you actually got started. Did you start out driving, or did you immediately go out and buy a limo? How did it actually come to fruition?
You know what? We bought a 1979 Formal, me and a guy named Bob, and I had a girlfriend at the time whose father owned a production company in Los Angeles called Coast Productions. And I wanted his business, or at least I thought I did. And he said, you know what? If you would drive my son to school every day for a semester, because they stopped busing kids to school at that time period in Los Angeles, I'll give you my business. I'll see how you do. So I think I charged the guy. Of course, I knew a lot about charging back then. I think I charged him $15 in each direction. But I made sure the kid got to school every day in his car. And if I didn't have my car available, I took him on my motorcycle, but I got him to and from. And he gave me Coast Productions. And the first client he gave me was an actress at the time, a very well-known actress named Victoria Principal. And I picked her up, and I drove her to a commercial shoot. And kind of a funny story. When I got to the shoot, the people in the production said to me, okay, you've dropped her off. We'll call you at the end of the day and for you to come pick her up. And I kind of thought, gee, I'm going to get like two-hour minimums out of this. Wow, that's not much money. But I don't know if I was really thinking that at the time, maybe. But I went in to tell Miss Principal that I was leaving. And she was in her curlers and her robe getting ready for this commercial shoot. And I said, excuse me, Miss Principal, but the production company told me that I have to leave and that I'll come back and get you when you're ready. And she stood up and she took me by the hand and walked me out into the set and said, who said that? And at then I realized I was in over my head. And I said, that guy. And she walked up to him and she said, if he leaves, I leave. He stays here and you pay him all day long until I'm damn good and ready to go. And that's how it's going to work. And that shoot lasted a week, and right then and there I learned the power of celebrity.
Absolutely. It's a great way to get some hourly work. So, okay, that's the first month or first year in business. How did you actually grow that business?
You know what? Because I delivered cars to a company called Frontline Management. They were or still are a rock and roll music entertainment management firm owned by Irving Azoff. And the first client they gave me was Dan Fogelberg, who has since passed, a lovely guy. But he was on top of the charts back then with an album called The Innocent Age. And I went and picked him up, and I was 20. Dan was probably 27. And, I always try to figure, how could I make this, special? And I would put, Perrier in the car, or, napkins or gum or candy. And he liked me, and he'd call me in the middle of the night. Of course, I was new to this business. I didn't know a damn thing. And he'd call me at 4 in the morning, and he'd say, come pick me up at the studio. I've had a drink or two. Drive me home. And I would show up to the studio, and I'd walk into a sound stage, and there would just be this wall of music, so to speak, and it would be like him and Don Henley and J.D. Souther and Linda Ronstadt, and Prince would be there, and Jimmy Buffett, whoever was recording, and they would just be jamming. And I just took one client at a time back to their home or their hotel, and it kind of built that way. And I met Bob Newhart along the way through somebody else, and I met Quincy Jones, and this was now probably 1981, somewhere around there. And Quincy called me up one day, and he said, come to the studio. I'm making a record with Michael Jackson called Thriller. And he introduced me to Michael. And Michael said he didn't have my card, and it's only the voice that he can do. And I drove Michael almost every day for like the next 3 years. And so here I was with this, at the time, this relevant star, the superstar. And when he did the Motown special, the 20-year Motown special, and he did the moonwalk, of course, across the stage for the first time, it just ignited. So like everywhere Michael went, I went with him because I was driving him, and I met everybody. And soon I was driving Sophia Loren for him. I drove Jackie Onassis for a couple of weeks every day. She was really cool. Liz Taylor, Gregory Peck, Katharine Hepburn. I met everybody. And I mean, and it just snowballed through the 80s. And probably in the mid to early 1980s, I got the opportunity to drive a guy named Brian Murphy. And Brian Murphy needed to get from Sherman Oaks to Irvine Meadows in a big hurry one afternoon. And there was just no way we were going to make it. And kind of unbeknownst to him, we used to have these big, when cellular phones came out, these huge phones in the front of the car. And I called a helicopter company. And I said, hey, listen, I need a helicopter. I need to take this guy to the backstage of Irvine Meadows. And he's freaking out in the back. He was like, where are you going? What are you doing? And I said, look, we're never going to make it down there, sir. I said, but if you go in this elevator in this building, go to the roof, there's a helicopter up there, and you'll be there in 20 minutes. Anyway, long story short, he made it, and he came back. And he gave me Avalon Attractions. And what that meant in 1984 was that every rock and roll band that played in Los Angeles, because they were the promoter, was given to me on a silver platter. So whether it was the Go-Go's or Warrant or Wasp or Rat or Dolly Parton or the Grateful Dead or what became U2 and Guns N' Roses and the Rolling Stones and Madonna, every major rock and roll band in the world was said, use Charlie. So the 80s was just nonstop rock and roll. That's what we did in the 80s. That's how we cut our teeth in the 80s. That's how we started it. So from 1980 with one car, by the time 1990 rolled around, I was doing $1 million a year, and I had 10 cars. And that was the start of it.
Wow. So it seems like the 80s was purely networking and going above and beyond Call of Duty for your clients. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we back then, we had beepers and payphones. And, I might be at a high school, my high school buddy's party or something, and I'd be wearing a suit and have the car parked outside, and I'd get a page, and it might be Jimmy Buffett's wife, and she might be out with Angelica Houston and say, Charlie, come get us. And I'd leave, and I'd go pick them up, and I didn't have anything else to do, and quite frankly, I was just kind of wired that way. I mean, I just didn't mind being on time and just, taking people where they had to go, and being of service. At a very early age, I understand, without knowing it, what my business was, which was to deliver service.
Gotcha. So let me ask you a question. If a new operator or a small operator, say 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cars, wanted to get in with a celebrity or wanted to get in with a high net worth individual, how would you recommend they kind of break through and get that first account?
It's interesting that you should ask that, and you'll probably laugh, but I'm actually that guy today. After 33 years of being in business, and riding the roller coaster, so to speak, to the moon and back a couple, 3 times, I find myself wanting to reemerge in the Los Angeles market. And so I'm that guy that you're, looking to give advice to, and my roadmap, I think, to success. I mean, clearly I have a tremendous amount of contacts and experience, and more so than the operator you're talking about. But I think the path is the same. I think that it depends on what you want to do. I was never that guy that wanted to do weddings and proms and kind of work for the general public. I wanted somebody that used the Limousine company as a staple, as something they did that they didn't have to think about. So I think that what you really need to look for is you need to try to get a relevant celebrity. Rihanna, Justin Bieber, Katy Perry. I mean, you got to look for that same ride that I took in the early 80s, where someone's using product and that you're, in public, all the time, and you're seen with these people, because of course that's what it is. It's networking. I mean, if I'm driving no offense, but if I'm driving you and I show up, to a party, I'm just another guy that rolled up, and you're, another, reporter type fellow that gets out, and you might be known or not. But when I roll up with Katy Perry over and over and over again, people take notice. They see that you're with her. The anticipation is that Charlie's going to be bringing Katy Perry, and that breeds its own success. You hand out cards. You be sincere. You want to earn people's business. There's no room for any kind of arrogance. I mean, you really have to. You got to work hard. You've got to find a relevant. I think you got to find a relevant celebrity, and the way you do that is you got to find out who manages that person. And then it's really, it's phone calls, it's brochures, online stuff, trying to get in with a secretary. I mean, you might have to stop by every day or once a week with Starbucks gift cards. You got to get your foot in the door someplace within the organization that's got the ability to deliver you a client. And it could take a week, it could take a year. I mean, it just depends, how you're wired, but if you stay home and think about it and think that people are going to bring stuff to you, or that you're going to get that the internet's going to help you if you're blogging and all that kind of stuff, I don't believe that. It's an old-fashioned business. I mean, you've got to suit up and you got to show up. I mean, it's the weirdest thing, but you've just got to get out there. You just got to try.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about 1990 to up until the peak of CLS, when you were up into the hundreds of vehicles. Talk to me about what it must have been like to ride the rocket ship of growth that was your company. Talk to me about bringing on staff, bringing on management, and how you handle all that growth.
Big question. Well, the ride, kind of looks like this. By 1990, at that time, I was recently married, and my wife at the time worked at the Ritz Carlton in Marina Del Rey. And, we were just a bunch of kids, so to speak, kind of flying by the seat of our pants that had this piece of business in Los Angeles. And so, I went after the Ritz Carlton, and I was able to get it. And what we learned with the Ritz Carlton, when you talk about management, was the Ritz Carlton, as other hotel companies do, spend lots of money on training, their credo, their mission statement. But the thing that made the most amount of sense to me about the Ritz Carlton was that they were ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And they talked about like what owning the complaint was, or what lateral service was, or what service delivery was. So we went to their orientation as a company, and we learned how to be ladies and gentlemen, so to speak, and adopted their policies with delivering service. And so with the Ritz Carlton in 1990, alongside of that, with the rock and roll business and individual people that I, had starting to use me, I met another guy who was a chauffeur, and he introduced me to another guy who was this Chinese fellow that was head of security for the royal family of Brunei. So for the next kind of 3 years, I'd say it was about a 2.5-year ride, I was in charge of the ground transportation in Los Angeles, in New York, Las Vegas, West Palm Beach, wherever they went, and organizing it in the cities where I didn't have cars for the Sultan's brother, Prince Jeffrey, for one of his wives. And, without playing musical instruments, they were kind of like a rock and roll band. I mean, tons of limos, tons of buses, extreme, crazy wealth, and spent it like rock stars. And, I just spent the last 10 or 12 years being trained by those guys. So we went on this great ride. And kind of in spite of what I was doing with the royal family, one day that business ended, and we were doing like $10 million a year, and this was probably around 1995. And I had moved into New York. We were given about...
Can I pause you for 1 sec? Take you back to the Ritz Carlton story before we get into the New York side of it. Can you kind of tell me what it means to service someone on a Ritz Carlton level, and really what they taught you at the orientation and the trainings?
Yeah, well, the Ritz Carlton, it's kind of like one for all and all for one. And what I mean by that is that if you're a sales associate, and let's just say you're a woman, and you're wearing your business outfit, whether it be a business dress or pantsuit or whatever, and they're short of valet parkers for a wedding on Saturday, they'll call you and say, we need you to come in and park cars. And that's called lateral service. And so And by the same token, if the sales department needed greeters to, greet arriving guests or sit by the pool or help in their department, they might get people from valet. So, kind of what you learn in that is, with regard to if you're a dispatcher and there's a car out in the yard and you got a job to cover and there's no way to cover that job, well, you better brought a suit to work and you better be qualified to drive, because you need to call forward those phones if you need to and put that suit on and go do that job. I mean, failure is unacceptable. If there's a way to get it done, even if it means you're going to get it done, it might not be your job description, and that's how success is built. Owning the complaint, that was a huge thing to learn. So often, and I'll use the limousine analogy, the limousine company analogy as to what owning the complaint was. What we learned at the Ritz Carlton was that at the Ritz Carlton, what it was is if a guest, arrived and said, my limousine was late in picking me up, by example, and he was furious about it, to say to the guest, well, I wasn't the one that arranged your limousine, and I'm sorry, but that's not my fault. That's not good. You need to own the complaint. Gee, I am sincerely sorry that we didn't take care of you. How can I make your trip better? And it's the same thing with limousine services. What happens is you might be late for picking up a client at the airport. The chauffeur can burn you, and he doesn't mean to. It's just a normal reaction. Is that the guy gets in the car finally and he goes, where were you? I ordered this car 2 weeks ago. And the chauffeur goes, I just got the order 2 minutes ago. Don't yell at me. That's not good, because then the chain reaction is that he goes to his secretary and beats her up. Did you really order that car 2 weeks ago? Then they beat up the travel agent, then they beat up the limousine company. It's just a lot of drama. If the driver just owns the complaint and says, I'm sincerely sorry I'm late, but how can I make your trip better? He kills it right then and there. He takes it for the company. He takes it for any deficiency whatsoever. You've got to own the complaint right then and there to stop the craziness and get on with your day.
That's great. And what level does management intervene in a complaint situation? And what level do you comp the ride? How do you kind of de-escalate a situation?
Well, if you do enough hotel business like I did with 4 seasons around the country, pretty much the agreement is the customer is always right. So let me give you an example of the customer being right. Here's an extreme example. In New York, during it was a World Series game at Yankee Stadium. Or no, it was a football game at Giant Stadium. 4 Seasons ordered a car for a guy. Pick him up, take him to the stadium, gets out of the car, and you say, sir, see this post right here? It says F4. This is where I'll be. When the game's over, I'll meet you right here. And the client goes, no problem. Right here, no problem. I'll see you after the game. Have a great time. Well, after the game, guy never shows up. Hotel calls up screaming, saying, hey, that guy you took to the stadium, he just arrived in a taxi. Oh, we said to them, well, wait a minute, we talked to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith said he would meet me at F4. Well, Mr. Smith's seats were on the other side of the stadium, and when he came out, he jumped in a taxi. Well, what's the lesson learned? When do you comp the order? I felt I didn't do anything wrong. I felt that I made an arrangement with a client that understood English, that was smart and understood where he was going to meet my driver. He used the service and he should pay for it. The hotel said, we're not paying for it. Well, why not? Because the concierge said, because you should have asked Mr. Smith where his seats were, and then you should have positioned yourself at the nearest exit to get Mr. Smith and then bring him to the car. Now that's craziness, but it taught us how to take it. What happens in companies is you might do 1,000 orders a year, and you might have a 2% failure rate, and that's pretty good. 98%, you're kicking their ass. You're doing great. You're delivering service. The problem is you have to live in the 2%. That's your reality. You're 2%. You have to live in the failure of the 2%, or you're not going to get any better, because the 2% is unacceptable. When we would do heart and liver team transfers for a company called Helenet in Los Angeles, the tolerance for failure was 0. Imagine that. But think about what you're doing. I mean, you're picking up some doctors and taking them to a private jet who go and harvest a liver, bring it back. Of course, there's a team of chauffeurs on the other end taking the doctors to and from. So if you screw it up in any way, shape, or form, there's usually a life in the balance. So you learn the zero tolerance, and going back to your question about comping things, if the hotel said comp it, we'd comp it. If the hotel was wrong, we'd comp it. As long as the hotel knew that they knew that this time they had screwed it up, we still comped it. Whether or not we'd make the hotel pay for it, you know what? If you got paid on 95% of all the jobs you did you have a bad experience? Probably not. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, it's at the discretion pretty much of the client or the hotel. My rule when it comes to an individual is if a guy spends 12 hours in a limousine, at the end of the night complains about the 12 hours and what a horrible service it was, I always say to the guy, at what point during the 12 hours of your conscious continued use of this car did you decide that the service wasn't good enough? And when that was, why did you continue to use it? I'm not completely normal when it comes to this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, there is a reason why you got to where you got to in terms of business size. So there must be some method to your madness. So talk to me about how you train that and how you ingrain that into your culture and into your staff.
Well, as far as the handbook went, as I said, we modeled things after the Ritz Carlton. That was pretty much good enough. But when it came to driving, very early on in the 80s, we took the time to train the chauffeurs, and there had to be a degree of wanting to be the best that you could be, and that's what we developed. I mean, so much so that we would make the guys, well, I shouldn't say make, but we wanted them to dress a certain way. So we didn't want guys. See, the problem with a lot of chauffeurs is they want to dress. When you talk about uniform, they want to dress in these nice suits, might be different colors, pinstripe, this, that, and they all look great if they're going out. Problem is that when you're wearing a regular suit and you're driving a Rockstar or you're driving a regular client, that sometime during the night, if you're lucky, you get to be kind of friends with them for the evening. And my issue with the driver is you have to constantly wear a uniform that represents that you're a chauffeur. Because at 4 o'clock in the morning, I don't want you with your black tie off, your white shirt with your black jacket off. I want you dressed as a servant, as a chauffeur. I want this guy to constantly realize that no matter how drunk or having a good time that he might be, that he realizes that he's got not a friend with him, but someone that he's paying for. So the outfit that you wear is so important because you need to look like that guy. So in training him, technology's helped us a lot. Drive cam, I'm sure you've heard of that, is a huge thing for us. I mean, if you're in the service business now where you give a guy something to drive, whether it's a flower truck or a limousine, you got to have drive cam because it gives you the ability as the owner to ride along with these guys when they tell you that they weren't going over those speed bumps at 100 miles an hour to show him that he was. And it saves on maintenance and, you get the right drivers. But anyway, back in the day, in the 80s, we used to run the drivers, actually. We would run them we'd say, okay, you're at Terminal 4, and you can see out the window that your plane is now going to Terminal 5, which was a good, maybe half of a quarter of a mile. And I said, hey, you can't miss the guy, because if you missed the first guy off the plane, he might have been your guy. So it doesn't help you to be late. So we'd run them, and we'd run them to the other terminal. And once we got there, we'd open up a book and have a paragraph, and it'd say, read this. And if they were huffing and puffing and couldn't comprehend what they were reading, we generally wouldn't hire them. But if they could read and talk intelligently after running for almost a quarter of a mile, well, then we figured they were in good enough shape to do what we wanted done.
Gotcha. Okay, so let me ask you a question about your pricing model. What's your thought on pricing? Are you a premium priced service, or do you kind of fall in the middle of the pack? Where's your pricing lie?
We were terribly expensive. Over the years, my whole thing was, hey, have the best equipment, and the best equipment costs money. So, we were running around in Mercedes-Benzes and, high-priced stuff. And I believe in being paid for what we did, so we always, and of course, I'd rather give a guy a car free. I mean, it's like people say to me, can you give me a discount on the service? And I said, well, can you give me a discount on the car? And I said, I'll give you the car for free, but you're going to pay for the service. I mean, the model was whatever the market would bear, to tell you quite frankly. And in the 90s, it's a different economy. We didn't have a recession going on. CLS became a brand like Cartier or Tiffany. If you were a record company executive and you got to use CLS, you had arrived. You were in a club. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not saying that arrogantly. It's just it is what it was. I mean, I don't mean to accelerate the conversation, but there's a reason why, Empire today enjoys having the Empire CLS brand. I mean, it means something, and, it meant excellence. It still means excellence.
Got it. Okay. So I cut you off earlier about New York. Why don't you get back to that side of the story of you guys entering the New York market?
Yeah, New York City, I was giving Music Express about $250,000 a year in business, and at the time it seemed like a lot of money. I wouldn't do this again today, but my business in LA was, at the time I was probably doing maybe $4 or $5 million a year. And we said, take a shot. So we sent a girl that we trusted, who was a good employee, named Stephanie Garcia, out to New York with one car. And in 1 year's time, we went from one car to 15 cars and $1.5 million in business, solely because of two factors. One was that one of my clients, a guy named Ron Perlman, who was a billionaire investor, liked me and was a client of mine. And he asked me if I had any business in New York, and I said, not really. And so he said, well, send 3 cars to my office every day, and I'll let you take my secretaries home. You'll have a standing order every day. So that was, a generous, proposition. And the business from LA would come to New York like Monday through Friday, and then we'd have nothing on the weekends. Like they'd fly home, and we didn't have any local business. So, we kind of rapidly grew from 1993 until about 1997, kind of like in kind as far as sales volume, because our clientele that was using us in Los Angeles, would go to New York. And then you'd hear Elton John was going to New York, and I went to him and said, hey, you had a great experience with us here. Can I do your business in New York? And say, sure. Or, Sting, or, the rock bands. And so now we're doing business in LA and New York with these people in this building. But it wasn't until, I had the royal family of Brunei in New York, and I met up with the Four Seasons general manager and made a deal with him that I would provide the Four Seasons Mercedes-Benz sedans for Lincoln Town Car prices. And when I did that, they jumped all over it. And overnight, I got the Four Seasons New York. But the trick was, the Four Seasons New York was also owned by the same people who own the Four Seasons in Los Angeles and the region Beverly Wilshire, and they wanted the same product. So I'm not kidding you. In about a 3-week time period, I took the Four Seasons New York, the St. Regis New York, the Four Seasons Los Angeles, and the region Beverly Wilshire away from my competitors to CLS. And that totally spring-loaded us. I mean, I like to believe I'm the one that pioneered chauffeur-driven Mercedes-Benzes. I mean, they weren't doing it before. And we had the largest fleet of chauffeur-driven Mercedes-Benzes. Probably maybe 80 cars of our fleet were Mercedes-Benzes. I still think today, Mr. Seelinger has got probably like in kind, if not more. But anyways, that made our business grow tremendously. And then I met another guy named Richard Santulli in the late 90s, and I met him through Casey Wasserman, who was the grandson of Lou Wasserman, the founder of Universal Pictures. And Richard Santulli was the chairman of a company called NetJets. And I started doing business with them in a little way. And one day he called me up and he said, Charlie, Kerry Limousine has pissed me off for the last time. He said, could you come to Ohio and I'll give you NetJets? Anyway, long story short, I went to New York. I went to Ohio. I got his piece of business, and it turned out to be worth about $8 million. And so from 1990 at $1 million to the year 2000, we went from $1 million to probably $60 million gross, all 3 companies, including Las Vegas, which we didn't talk about yet.
Wow. Now, you're in a pretty unique position to judge this because you've been at the highest level of the game. Which is a harder market to operate in, New York City or Los Angeles?
New York.
And why?
High density. See, on the one hand, you got to understand that it's like talking about apples and oranges. And the reason why I say that is because you take Jimmy Buffett, who flies into Southern California, and he'll take the limo from the airport to the hotel where he's got a convertible Mercedes rented for his stay, and he'll drive himself around. But he flies to New York, and he keeps that limousine with him all the time because it's a chauffeur-driven environment. So from a product standpoint, my average ticket in New York City was always about $270. In LA, it was probably 210, 212. They keep cars longer because it's a necessity out there. And yet it's harder to do business because, it's New York City. It's high density, high energy. There's, 15,000 cars in the city, if not more. It's probably a lot more now. And you have bridges, tunnels, and snow. California, it's sunny, the weather's nice. It's a huge geographic area. It's easier. It's more challenging to make good, consistent business that makes sense, but it is easier to operate in Los Angeles. New York City is much more regulated, much tougher, just high density. What is it? 9 million people living in a very small radius. I mean, it's different. I didn't have a tough time with it. I mean, I didn't have any issues with anybody. I mean, I went there and I built my business. Some of the people were receptive, and I was lucky to have some of the best chauffeurs, and I had a huge clientele from Los Angeles, and it worked. But yeah, it's harder, no doubt about it. Those guys have to be, and also it's harder from a standpoint that the chauffeur in New York City can work way more hours. Not that the LA guy won't, but that the demand for service in New York City is an easy 15-hour day. I mean, it's going and blowing. It's one of the meccas of the world. It's New York.
Got it. Okay, so let's talk about CLS going into Las Vegas. When did that happen? And then let's just talk about Vegas.
Went to Las Vegas a lot. My wife's parents had business here, and what I thought was crappy service, I came to realize was the way service was done in Las Vegas wasn't crappy at all. It was just different, and I didn't understand it, but I wanted in. And as you're probably well aware, Vegas is probably one of the most regulated cities with regard to, getting in. It's a little different now than it was then, but back then there was a guy named Willard Booth. He owned a company called Lucky 7 Limousine, and Lucky 7 Limousine was like this beat-up company. The guy did his best. He's a nice little guy. He did his best, but he wasn't CLS. He had these, this was probably 1994, 95. He was running 1982 Cadillacs with broomsticks holding open the trunk. And, his idea of a charter was the local school calling up and delivering pizzas, because God knows nothing more than a cardboard box would have wanted to sit in the back of one of those cars. But anyways, I paid $2 million for the opportunity to buy a company with an unlimited license, which was a huge deal. And, the guy was probably $500,000 upside down, and everybody told me I was nuts and that I shouldn't do it. And, I became friends with the owner of Bell. His name is Brent Bell. He's a great guy. Brent Bell's probably one of the best operators in the country. He could easily go run a Coca-Cola. I mean, he's born and bred into this business, but I became friends with him. And he's maybe 10 years younger than me, maybe a little less. But we became friends, and I learned about, how the regulation in Las Vegas, the rules and the laws were designed to protect tourism. I mean, what else do we have here? And, it kind of galled me at the time that you take an $80,000 stretch limousine and you couldn't get much more than an hour minimum, but it's only a 15-minute ride to the airport. You know what I mean? I mean, you couldn't get those big minimums. So I was lucky at the time, I guess I've always been lucky, was that John Beck at Crystal Coach called me and said, Steve Wynn is selling his 2-year-old or 3-year-old limousines. You should buy them. And I said, why the hell would I want those? And he said, because then you could go to Mr. Wynn and you could support his overflow. He probably has extra business. So I called Steve Wynn, and, at the time, as he is today, one of the most gracious, wonderful guys. And I went and saw him, and I said, Mr. Wynn, if you let me buy your cars, we double your fleet.
How did someone just call Steve Wynn?
I did. I did. I swear to God, I did. I called up.
I had to pause you there. I mean, that's a hell of a phone call to make.
Well, you think it is, but I mean, you got to kind of look at who Steve Wynn is and how he made his business and where he came from. And I called up and I said, look, I'm Charlie Horky. I own this company called CLS, and I'm new in town, and I want to buy your cars that you're going to get rid of. And that kind of piqued his interest to some extent. So I bought them. And, and I became the overflow for the transportation department. Now, that was a big shoe in because he went on to build, the Bellagio. And when he built the Bellagio, wasn't there long after, maybe 4 years, that MGM came in and bought them. And I was already so involved with the Mirage, with Mr. Wynn. I mean, he still uses Empire CLS today. He'd call me personally and say, he was going somewhere. Anyway, it's a small town. It's a very small town in some ways. So my company stayed in the MGM Mirage family, which is now known as MGM Resorts. And I was involved with them for 17 years. I mean, and so that company grew into what I wanted it to be, but just the way the people did business in Las Vegas, which was slightly different, but still impeccable service for the, need and necessity of the traveling public that came to this town.
And how do you maintain that level of service in a volume-based model where the pricing is considerably lower?
It's funny you say that. There are other people that are a lot better at that than me. I would say Cheryl Berkman, Scott Salambrino, Dawson Rudder, Brent Bell, David Seelinger. A lot of these guys are super smart guys, real smart guys that understand chapter and verse about service delivery. And they read about it, and they hire people to train these, guys that were chauffeurs that stuck around. In the limousine industry, you kind of collect people over the years. And, it's paying attention every day and having classrooms and going after that kind of employee and training. I mean, it's just constant training. But to tell you the truth, that isn't what I did. I admire those guys for what they did, and there was from time to time, I did it differently. I would hire a guy named Rich Caverti, and he was awesome, and I would bring him in because he was one of the best chauffeur trainers in the world, and he would train like generations of my guys. And then what I would do is I would bring in new people, and if I kind of thought they fit the bill or they had experience, I'd hook them up with senior drivers, and the senior drivers would have to mentor them. So it was an approval process. If a senior guy thought you were useless, you didn't get to keep your job. But if a senior guy could develop you and you could develop into the family of CLS, you stayed. But I really believe that the biggest key to my success was my personal involvement on a daily basis with my clients. And, I'm the kind of guy that led from the front. And what I mean by that is I didn't buy a limo company and say, hey, go out there and service those clients. I drove that car. And up until, 5 or 6 years ago, I still drove Ronald Perlman to, the Academy Awards. When Sting's in town in Las Vegas, I drive him myself. You got to stay in contact with the client. And the client's got to see that you're in contact with your men. And if you lead from the front, think about it. There's nothing anyone in my company can do better than me, except maybe an accounting guy. I can dispatch better than my dispatchers. I can think faster. I can take reservations. I can anticipate what the client needs before it comes out of his mouth, just kind of knowing what he wants to do. I know more about the driving of the car and how to dress appropriately and how to act like a chauffeur than all my guys. So when it came to training, oh my God, I think it was I was out there. They wanted to work for me, so they wanted to be the best because they saw that I was wanting to be the best, and they saw that I had the clientele to back it up, and I had the praise of the clientele to back it up. And God willing, I go back into the Los Angeles market in a very short time. Maybe I'll get lucky, and the children of the important people that I drove all these years who remembered me growing up seem to want the same thing again. Who knows?
Okay. And you also went into the Vail and the San Francisco market, correct?
I did go to San Francisco. That was a mistake. That was me getting way ahead of myself. Should have never bought that company. If you're going to buy a company in a market outside of your own, they better be doing at least $8 million a year, because otherwise it's not worth it. And it's not worth it because it takes the same amount of energy to run an $800,000 company as it does an $8 million company. It was a bad idea. I didn't understand the market. It was not a good idea. And Aspen was a mistake too. I only went into Aspen because NetJets went into Aspen quite frequently. We thought we needed to have a presence there, but in hindsight, we just needed to find the best guys out there and utilize them. We didn't need to be there. You need to be in a city that you're in, and then maybe, like, if you're in Texas, I could see the San Antonio Austin deal. I could see San Antonio, Austin, Dallas. I kind of get those markets if they make sense. For me, LA, New York, Las Vegas, they're the relevant three. The rest of them, call Mitch down, with Aventura, not Mitch, Neil at Aventura. Call, Tom Mulligan at, Metropolitan in Chicago. You know what I mean? I mean, these guys are the best at what they do in their city. There's no reason to start up unless you can buy a company or have a piece of business that's going to generate over $8 million a year.
Got it. Okay. I mean, that's, what is it? 99% of the market isn't over 8 million. It's a hard thing for most operators to fathom.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but I happen to be a big fan of this new thing called Uber. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a fabulous thing. I mean, and the reason why I think it's fabulous is because, like you said, hey, 99% of the business is not going to hit those kinds of numbers. Listen, this business is for people that want to be in business for themselves, that might own a car or as many as 5, and more likely 3. It's a really fragmented business, and Uber does a really good job at, making business for these guys and getting something done for them, cash flow, while they build their own businesses. So, you're right. To go on the path I went on, you gotta look at it. But I was 20 years old. I dropped out of high school. I didn't go to college. There was no business plan. I mean, I just flew by the seat of my pants with probably above average intelligence, raised well, and wanted to get something done. It turned into something great. I mean, a lot of that was luck, and hard work. But today, I think it can be done again if somebody's, there's a guy out there that owns a company in LA called Exclusive, Brandon Stein. He's my bet on the future as far as maybe being able to getting something done like I did with CLS.
Well, yeah, I'm hoping to have Brandon and his father on in the show, hopefully in mid-May. I'm excited to have them on, so that's exciting to hear. So you deal with a lot of affiliates around the country, and you've hired a lot of affiliates, and you've hired a lot of local subcontractors. What's the number one mistake a small 1 or 2 car operator is making when they approach you? What could they do better to win you over sooner to get some of your overflow business?
I'd have to speak to you from experience because I've been out of the affiliate business for about 7 years. Las Vegas is a destination town. Our clientele here doesn't really go. Let me explain to you this way real quickly. My clients in Las Vegas were the hotels. The people that used the service was so vast that there was no real. I don't know anybody here that does national business. We're a destination town. But to answer your question, at the time, what did I look for? That's a tough question. What you wanted to do was be able to use it. It depended where he was. There was a guy in Atlanta. I wish I could remember his last name. Tony. I think he owns North Point Limousine. He didn't have a really big company, but I didn't have a really huge business that went to Atlanta. But he did a great job, and we liked him. I mean, it's just could he put up with the way we paid him? Did we like him? Did he like us? Did he give good service? Did the clients like him? You might meet a guy that lives in Chico, California, where you never send anybody, maybe once in a blue moon. And what does he have to do to qualify? He says, hey, Charlie, I'm in business. I got a town car. I got an SUV. I got a limo. Okay, man, cool. What year are they? They're like, 2 or 3 years old. I take really good care of them. Me and my wife, run the company. Okay, great. And then there's those situations where you get an affiliate because your client wants to go to someplace like Winnemucca, Nevada, where there is no service, and you got to kind of figure it out. And you just meet people along the way, and they do you right, and they kind of think the way you do, and so you use them. I mean, I realize that there is a whole format to big companies like Empire CLS and Daval and Carey, where the whole affiliate thing is very structured, and for liability reasons, it's got to be. They got to have a lot of data and information, as would I if I did it again in the future. But what I'm really looking for is a guy that's passionate about providing the service. I don't want a guy that's going to show up with his wife. I don't want a guy that's going to ask for autographs or pictures or tickets. I want someone that's passionate about being the best that he can be. I don't care if he wears a chauffeur outfit and a cap and gives my client a red rose every time he gets in the car. If he's passionate about what he does and the car's clean and he shows up on time and I can depend on him, I'm using him. It's that simple. It's not real difficult.
Okay, so let's say you were starting over from scratch and didn't know a single person in the industry, didn't have any professional contacts. You just had a town car, or you just had an SUV, or you just had a Mercedes. What would you do? How would you go out and get clients? How would you start over?
If Uber was in my city, I would sign up with them because Uber would keep me working every day so that I could afford to pay my car payment, my gas, and my insurance, and give me the ability to be on the street and try to build my own business. That's what I would do today. If I was in a non-Uber city, so to speak, you got to target who's using cars in your town. You know, if you're in a small town, relatively small town like Chico, California, so to speak, you know, and there's already 3 limousine companies, might not be a good idea. If you're in San Francisco, you know, I think if you have the wherewithal to buy the car and you can get hooked up with, let me answer your question a little better. When I first started, I got my first jobs from Dick Hundley, who's Chris Huntley's father, who's since passed, of the Limousine Connection. My very first jobs I did before I ever met Quincy Jones or Michael Jackson or anybody was I worked for Don St. John, a Town & Country Limousine, and his son Dale, and Chris Hundley and his father Dick at Limousine Connection. And you do farm work. I mean, because that's all you can do. They got the business and you don't. And that doesn't mean you go in there and take their clientele. That means you go there and you learn your craft working for other guys that are already here in business. I mean, that's what you do.
Got it. I like it. And what advice would you have for a new operator? You know, just any parting words for a newcomer.
Don't be on time. Be early.
Ooh, I like it. That could be the quote of the episode.
Yeah, that's really what it's all about. You know, in my new company that we're starting in Los Angeles, there's 2 phrases that we are drilling into. Actually, you know, I'm in a unique situation because I've been in this business for 32 years, and there's a lot of guys that would like to work with me in Los Angeles, so I'm getting the best of the best that are already stone cold professionals. And what it really boils down to is 2 phrases: driver tradecraft and service delivery. And tradecraft obviously is you know, kind of a word used by, you know, CIA and stuff like that. But what it really means is, you know, is knowledge through experience. And today, you know, it's applicable to anybody, you know, starting up. Is that your tradecraft is you're a driver, you're a chauffeur, and you have got to understand service delivery. You have to understand the delivery of service. That's what you're doing. You're not just showing up in a limousine. You're delivering service. And you've got to know what you're doing. And the only way that you can know what you're doing is if you take it seriously. And if they tell you the plane's coming in at 4 o'clock, get there at 3 o'clock. Go hang out. You know, I mean, you know, be ready. Because that's, you know, once you're on the backside of the curve in this business and you're late, as I said, when you miss the first person walking off an airplane, you're hosed. You know, you've got to be there. You got to be ready for the change. You got to be prepared. But it's not what it said about Boy Scouts. You know, be prepared.
Got it. Excellent. Do you have any parting words or anything else before we wrap up?
No, it's a lot of fun to get to talk to you. I appreciate you letting me ramble.
Absolutely. I learned a lot. I think small to mid-sized owner is going to get a lot out of this interview, and I love that you hammered home service, training, and tradecraft. I love that. I love how you brought in the CIA reference. I like it. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was nice to talk to you. Thanks, Ed.